The jewelry dish was empty. It should have been impossible to miss, a small circle of dust where the ring used to sit every night. But I only noticed because my fingers reached for the familiar cool of gold and met air. That moment sharpened everything. The quiet of the bedroom, the kettle starting downstairs, the way the morning light cut across the dresser and made the dust look like tiny, held breaths. Some stories don't just tell pain, they reveal the truth. This is one of them. Voice of Aunt. I remember the exact place the ring slept. 20 years it had lived there, next to a faded photograph of him in a coat he never wore out of pride, a coffee stain on the corner of the frame. It used to catch the sun at the same hour every morning and splinter light into the room. I reached where it always was, and my hand returned with nothing but that clean, cold air you get when something has been taken without a sound. Leela was in the kitchen, humming at the sink. She was 26 and moved like someone who believes there is always time to fix things later. Phones that need upgrading, rent that runs out, a promise to herself to start saving on Monday. When I called her name, she didn't turn immediately. She kept rinsing the cup, and her laughter floated through the doorway like someone else's story. I didn't shout. I don't shout. I stood with my palm flat against the empty dish until the hum of the refrigerator felt loud enough to be a voice. She came in and caught my face, that quick, unreadable look that is softer when you're a child and sharper when you are not. She washed her hands and dried them on the towel, slow enough to show she wasn't hiding anything obvious. "You said you never wear it anymore," she said, like it was a fact that solved everything. She was careful, as if she had learned how to soften edges. "It's not the same as giving it away," I said. My voice was smaller than I expected. I could see the ring on the inside of my eyelids, the inscription, his handwriting small and slanted, a private joke turned into a line of silver. I remember the day he slipped it on my finger. He had been shaking, not from cold. He had written his words inside with a steady hand. "For every sunset you survived with me." I liked to press my thumb to those tiny letters sometimes, as if remembering them might keep them from fading. She chewed her lip and looked away. "I thought, you said you didn't wear it," she said, and for a beat I watched the way her fingers twined with the towel. "I sold some old things last week. There was some extra cash, Mom. I thought." "You can call it a slip or a mistake." It was both. The sentence came at me like a small animal, quick and wanting to be forgiven. I felt the old, precise anger that arrives only in the face of what's familiar being rearranged, like someone stacking your china differently and pretending you won't notice. But what came out of me was a different thing. Confusion, the way you get when a memory doesn't fit where it should. When? The word was a careful thing, not a demand. It wanted to be a question with an answer that would put the missing piece back into the puzzle. "Last Tuesday. I needed the deposit for a place if I'm moving next month," she said. "I didn't think. I thought you wouldn't miss something you never use." There was guilt in her voice, but also a kind of practical calm she has when she's negotiating with the world. I watched the light on the dresser. The dust where the ring sat made a halo around nothing. I could picture him holding my hand, the way he smiled at the edges of his mouth when we could laugh about nothing. I could picture the ring closing over those words he made for me. It felt suddenly like a small theft that was not about money at all. I asked the simple things. "Who did you sell it to? Did they give a receipt?" And she told me names and places, but they were all thin as paper. She said the seller had been friendly and gave her cash in an envelope. She tried to make me see the economy of choices. "Mom, you know how tight things have been," she said. "Bills, the car, I thought I was helping." Helping. The word is soft until it isn't. I moved through the house like someone testing doors, opening cabinets I had always known closed, looking for the ring in ridiculous places. The bottom of the food drawer, under a heap of old scarves, even the basin of the sink as if it might have slipped and clung to the drain. Each empty place taught me the same thing. Absence is a kind of presence you can feel at the seam of the day. There are small acts that announce who you will be in a crisis. I could have called her a liar, or a thief in a louder voice, or nothing at all. Instead, I made coffee. I set a cup beside the empty dish and did not sit. I washed a plate that did not need washing. Those are the tiny decisions that feel like armor at first, the choosing to breathe into the space rather than fill it with noise. When she left that afternoon to run errands, to return a dress, she said, she kissed my forehead the way you kiss someone who is still trying to figure out how to keep their balance. I stood by the window and watched her go, the back of her head small against the world, and counted the steps she took until the gate clicked. The house swallowed the sound, and then it was just the soft rustle of curtains and the light on the dresser that made the dust halo like a memory waiting to be read. I sat down and took the empty dish in my hands. It fit like a memory where something had been taken out of the center. I pressed my thumb where the ring was, as if the indentation in the wood could remember gold. I couldn't force the words to stay in order. I could only feel the slow, patient ache of something important moved without being asked. I stood there, holding nothing, but feeling the weight all the same. The night was too still. Even the clock on the mantel forgot to tick for a few seconds, like it was listening. That's when the memory of the engraving came back, clear as breath on glass. For every sunset you survived with me. He had said it was a promise, not a line. A man who barely wrote cards somehow found the words that still warmed the coldest part of me. I hadn't looked inside the ring for years, but suddenly I could feel each letter pressing into my skin again, faint, but there. I sat at the kitchen table, my hands around a mug gone cold, and tried to remember the exact weight of it. It was thin, not expensive, the kind of gold that softened over time. He'd saved for months, skipping his own lunch breaks so that the engraving could be done by hand. When I wore it, I never took it off. Not even when I washed dishes, not even when the soap made my fingers wrinkle. I used to tell him it was my armor. He'd smile and call it my reminder. Now the reminder was gone, and the person who took it was upstairs, scrolling through her phone. It's strange how silence can sound like distance. I thought about the way Lila used to play with that ring when she was small. She would slip it on her thumb and walk around saying she was married to Daddy. He'd laugh, pretend to be jealous. She'd giggle and hand it back like it was just another toy. Maybe that's what it still was to her. Just something shiny, small, and replaceable. The kettle started again. Steam rose and curled into the air, the same way it used to on winter mornings when he'd stand behind me, close enough for his breath to fog the window. I could almost see him in the reflection on the glass, his shoulders, that quiet half-smile. It's funny how memory sometimes walks into a room without knocking. When she came down, she was still half distracted by her phone. "I'm heading out later," she said. "Emma's birthday thing." Her voice was bright, practiced. I looked up and waited for her to meet my eyes, but she didn't. She picked at the corner of the counter like she was looking for crumbs. "I found the rings box in the drawer," I said softly. "Empty." She froze for just a breath. "Mom, I already told you." "You told me you thought I wouldn't miss it." I didn't raise my voice, but she flinched anyway. There's a way mothers speak when they've stopped trying to be understood. They speak from memory, not anger. She sat down across from me, eyes shiny but hard. "I needed money, okay?" The deposit came up faster than I thought. My job? It's not steady right now. Her fingers drummed the table. I was going to tell you once things settled. The air between us felt heavy, like the space between what's done and what can't be undone. I wanted to tell her about the nights that ring kept me together, when bills stacked, when I thought grief would eat through the walls. But words like that never reach the person you want them to. They stop somewhere between love and pride. She sighed. You wouldn't understand, Mom? Maybe because you never asked me to, I said. The line slipped out before I could stop it. It didn't sound bitter, just tired. She pushed her chair back and stood. You're making this bigger than it is. Her tone cracked at the edges, and she left before I could say that some things are already big before they're lost. After the door shut, I stared at the space she'd left, the faint smell of her shampoo still hanging there. I wondered where I went wrong. Maybe in teaching her that love meant forgiveness without conversation. Maybe in pretending that things didn't hurt when they did. The sun had started to set. The light turned everything the color of his handwriting, faint gold and almost gone. I imagined him sitting across from me, the way he used to when he didn't know what to say. He'd just reach across, touch my hand once, and that would be enough. I looked at my bare finger and thought of that gesture, small but steady. Later, while washing the dishes, I tried to picture the ring resting somewhere else, on a stranger's hand, maybe lying under bright lights in a pawnshop tray. The thought made my stomach twist. It wasn't jealousy. It was something quieter, like seeing your reflection in another window and realizing it doesn't belong there. When Lila came back that night, she moved quietly, tiptoeing like guilt has weight. She didn't say goodnight. Just a muted, "See you in the morning," and a door clicking shut. I stood in the hallway, holding the edge of the wall like it might keep me upright. For a moment, I thought about knocking. Instead, I turned off the light. Maybe she thought gold forgets the hands it once knew. It was morning again, and the house was heavy with that kind of quiet that only exists after a storm that no one admits happened. I was cleaning without thinking, folding towels, moving papers from one counter to another, trying to make order out of air. And then, there it was. A small slip of paper tucked half under the toaster, edges curled with a drop of coffee on one corner. A pawnshop receipt. It took me a second to understand what I was holding. The ink had bled just enough to soften the letters, but the words were still clear. Gold band, engraving inside. My throat went dry. The date, last Tuesday. The price, smaller than a good meal out. I read it again, not because I doubted it, but because I didn't want to stop seeing it. Sometimes the truth arrives too quietly, and you need to hear it twice to let it land. I didn't call her name. I didn't even fold the paper right away. I just sat there on the stool, feeling its weight grow heavier than the ring ever was. I made a pot of coffee I didn't want. When it finished brewing, the smell of it felt too warm for the kind of day it was becoming. I stared at the steam curling out like someone whispering a truth they didn't mean to say. She came downstairs in that same gray hoodie, hair still damp from her shower, eyes red in the corners. I think she'd been crying, or trying not to. "Morning?" she said softly, voice almost kind. I only nodded. I couldn't trust my voice not to tremble, not with that paper still open in my hand under the table. She poured coffee, hummed under her breath, talked about some job application she sent, all the small, normal things. It's strange how normal words can sound wrong once you've seen proof. When she left for work, I took the receipt again, read the address. A street I hadn't visited in years, the kind of place you drive past but never stop. I held the phone for a while, thumb hovering over the numbers, then dialed anyway. "Morning," a man's voice said. "Harlan's Pawn and Collectibles." "Hello?" I said, trying to sound casual. "I'm looking for a gold band that might have come in last week. I think I lost something similar." "Lot of those," he said. "You have a description?" I looked at the empty dish on the dresser. The circle of dust still untouched. "Yes, simple gold band. There's an engraving inside." "Engraving?" He paused. I could hear papers shuffling. "Something like, for every sunset?" The words cracked open the air. I didn't realize I'd gone silent until he said, "Ma'am?" I cleared my throat. "That's the one," I said softly. "Ah, pretty words," he said. "Sold it the same day it came in. Didn't stay long. Rare thing, real sentiment like that. Rare thing." I thanked him, wrote down the name he offered, Mrs. Hayes, paid in cash. He said she seemed kind, the type who asked about the story behind the piece. He'd told her it came from a young woman who looked nervous. I almost laughed. Nervous sounded too clean for what I felt. When I hung up, the room was still. Only the clock ticked again, back to life after pretending to sleep through the truth. I pressed the receipt flat on the table, smoothing the edges. There was an urge, quick and reckless, to drive straight there, demand it back. But another part of me whispered, "Not yet." Anger that moves too early becomes noise. I wanted clarity, not noise. That night, when Lila came home, I said nothing. She noticed my silence. You always know when someone is pretending not to know something. She talked a little too fast, laughed a little too bright. I watched her, every movement soft and shaky, like she was tiptoeing around her own guilt. She asked if I wanted to watch a movie. I said I was tired. She asked if I needed anything. I said I was fine. It was the kind of politeness that feels like a locked door between two rooms. When she went upstairs, I took the receipt out again, folded it carefully. Once, twice, again, until it was small enough to disappear in my hand. I held it so tightly that my fingers left little crescents in the paper. The corners dug into my palm, and for a second, it felt like I was holding the ring again. Not metal this time, but the shape of its absence. There's a strange peace in knowing something quietly. It's like being given a candle in a dark room. The light hurts at first, but at least you can see where you are. Before I went to bed, I placed that folded receipt inside the empty ring box. No ring, just proof. Proof that the world can twist something sacred into a transaction and still call it ordinary. I folded the paper until it hurt to hold. The house had learned our silence. It moved around it like a polite guest. The refrigerator hummed softer. The floor creaked gentler. Even the wind outside careful not to knock too loudly against the windows. Days passed that way. Breakfasts half shared, questions asked without waiting for answers. Lila and I became shadows passing in different lights. In those quiet stretches, my mind kept circling the same small image, that ring in someone else's palm. Not because it was gold, but because of what it had carried. Words meant for one heartbeat, now lying cold in another hand. I started noticing details I'd missed before. The way she avoided looking at my left hand. The way she turned her phone screen away when messages popped up. The way her laughter on a call ended too quickly, like she didn't want it overheard. Guilt has its own volume. Once you've lived long enough, you recognize it even when it whispers. At night, when the house finally rested, I'd sit by the window with a blanket around my shoulders, the receipt box on the table beside me. Sometimes I'd touch the lid. Just once. A reminder that I wasn't imagining any of it. I thought about telling her what I knew, ending the game. But another part of me, the older, slower part, wanted her to see what she'd done without me having to name it. Maybe that was pride. Or maybe it was the quiet kind of love that still hopes the child will choose truth on her own. On the third day, she came home late. The sound of her keys in the lock startled me awake on the couch. She saw the lamp still on, hesitated at the doorway. "You're still up?" she asked. Her tone was light, but her eyes, not. "I couldn't sleep," I said. "Too much noise inside." She smiled weakly. "You should try one of those apps I told you about. They play ocean sounds." I nodded. "Maybe." She hovered for a moment, wanting to say more, maybe confessing in her head. But then she just said goodnight. Her door closed gently, like guilt closing behind it. The next morning, I went to the cemetery. It wasn't planned. My feet just took me there, like memory guiding muscle. The grass was damp, and the cold stone under my hand felt smoother than I remembered. His name carved deep, the letters filled with dew. "I lost something of yours," I whispered. Or maybe hers. Hard to tell these days. A bird moved in the tree above. For a long time, that was the only sound. Talking to him never gave me answers, but it settled the noise in my chest. I told him about the ring, about how she'd sold it for a deposit, how I wasn't angry, not in the way I should be. I told him I wanted her to understand the meaning of what she let go. Not through punishment, but realization. By the time I left, the sun had risen higher, enough to warm the stone a little. I pressed my palm there once more and walked away lighter, though nothing had changed. That afternoon, I sat at the table again, opened my notebook, and copied down the details from the receipt. Shop name, date, the name, Mrs. Hayes. It wasn't revenge I wanted. It was closure. I found the number online, printed neatly on a listing that said, collectibles, heirlooms, estate jewelry. My hand trembled only once before I dialed. A soft voice answered. "Harlan's pawn. This is Mrs. Hayes." I almost hung up, but her tone was kind, the kind that makes you believe you can tell the truth and still be understood. I said I was calling about a ring she might have bought recently. I described it slowly. Plain band, words inside about sunsets. There was a pause. I heard paper rustle, then a small sigh. "Oh," she said. "Yes, the little gold one. Beautiful engraving. It felt personal. I almost didn't want to buy it." Something in her voice made me breathe easier. She hadn't pawned it for profit. She'd seen it as a keepsake. That meant it wasn't lost, not completely. "Would you mind telling me?" I asked gently. "What made you choose it?" She laughed softly. "It reminded me of my husband. He used to say things like that. Thought it might be a nice engagement gift for my son's fiancée. But I couldn't stop thinking about whose story it was before mine." Her honesty cracked something open inside me. Not pain this time, but gratitude. There are strangers who hold our memories better than those we raise. We spoke for a few minutes. I didn't beg or demand. I only said that the words inside belonged to someone I loved, and that the person who sold it hadn't understood their weight. She listened, quiet, then said, "You know, maybe that ring still wants to go home." I thanked her, voice thin with relief. She promised to check the details and call me back. When I hung up, I sat for a long time in the stillness. The refrigerator hummed again. That same patient, constant sound that had been keeping time through all this. It reminded me of his breathing at night, slow and sure, when life felt simple enough to trust. That evening, I made dinner. Real dinner, not leftovers. The table looked fuller than it had in weeks. Lila came home, paused at the smell of roasted vegetables and rosemary. "You cooked?" she asked. "Felt like it," I said. She smiled a little, almost shyly. "Smells good." We ate mostly in silence, but it wasn't sharp silence anymore. More like a truce, uneasy, but real. She looked tired, maybe from the job, maybe from guilt. I didn't press. When she went to bed, I sat alone again, watching the clock hands crawl. Somewhere between the tick and the tock, I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness yet, but something close, the kind of stillness that happens before a tide changes. Forgiveness felt too clean for a wound still open. 2 days later, the phone rang while I was watering the little fern by the window. I almost didn't answer. Unknown number, local area code. But something in me said, "Pick it up." The voice was soft, steady. "Mrs. Allen, this is Helen Hayes. We spoke about the ring." For a heartbeat, I couldn't breathe. "Yes, hello. I still have it," she said. I couldn't bring myself to give it away. Something about the words inside felt too lived to be worn by someone new. My knees gave a little. I sat down slowly, the watering can still in my hand, dripping onto the floor. She told me she'd bought it intending to gift it to her son's fiancé, but never managed to wrap it. "I don't know why," she said, "but it felt like someone else was still waiting for it." I smiled, though my eyes blurred. Maybe it was waiting for me. She exhaled softly. "Then come. No need for money. Just a promise you'll keep it this time." That's how grace finds you sometimes, not through apology, but through a stranger's kindness. I drove to her house the next afternoon. A small white gate, an old maple tree shading the porch, wind chimes that sounded like light laughter. She opened the door before I could knock twice. She was older than I'd imagined, her hair silver and loose, her hands the kind that tell stories by touch. She didn't ask for ID or explanation, just looked at me once, long enough to see something beyond words, then disappeared inside and returned with a small velvet box. "I cleaned it for you," she said. It was beautiful, even before I did. When I opened the box, the ring caught the late sun like it recognized me. The engraving glowed faintly, softer than I remembered, as if the years had taught it gentleness. I didn't cry. Not yet. My throat closed around the kind of gratitude that doesn't know how to leave the body. "I don't know what to say," I whispered. She shook her head. "Don't. Some things you buy, some you inherit with promises. Keep that one in the family." We sat for tea. She told me about her son, about how he'd lost his fiancée in an accident 2 years ago, how the ring had reminded her of the vows she'd once witnessed. "Maybe that's why it felt borrowed," she said quietly. When I left, the box felt heavy, not from weight, but meaning. The world was softer that evening. Even the air felt slower. I kept the ring on my palm the entire drive home, turning it over, tracing the engraving with my thumb, memorizing it again. "For every sunset you survived with me." I realized then, he hadn't written we survived. He wrote you. Maybe he already knew I'd have to go on alone someday. At home, Lila wasn't back yet. The house smelled of detergent and faint vanilla candles. I placed the ring box on the dining table and just looked at it. For hours, maybe. Long enough for dusk to stretch into night. When I finally opened the note drawer, the one where I kept old letters, I found a small piece of cream stationery. Her childhood drawing still faint on the corner. A sun and 2 stick figures holding hands. I smiled. The perfect paper for what I needed to say. I wrote slowly, my pen shaking a little. "Lila, this ring isn't just gold. It's the part of your father that still knows how to speak. I'm not angry anymore. Just sad you didn't read it first. Read inside before you speak. Mom." I folded the paper, placed the ring on top, and wrapped both inside a small white box. I tied it with one of her old hair ribbons, pale blue, frayed at the ends. Then I walked quietly into her room. Her bed was unmade, her perfume hanging faint in the air. That mix of lavender and something sharp, young. I set the box on her pillow and stood there longer than I meant to. A mother's love doesn't disappear, it just waits behind closed doors. That night, sleep wouldn't come. I kept hearing the sound of the wind against the windows, like whispers caught in glass. Every hour I'd look at the clock, wondering if she'd seen it yet, if she'd understood. Around midnight, I heard the soft creak of her door. Then silence. Then footsteps in the hallway. Slow, uncertain. My heart beat faster, but I stayed still. The next morning, sunlight poured across the kitchen counter. I was stirring sugar into my tea when she came in, holding the box against her chest. Her eyes were swollen, her lips trembling, but she didn't try to speak. She just placed it on the table between us, open this time, the ring glinting in the light. Her fingers shook as she traced the inside with her thumb, whispering so softly I almost missed it. I didn't realize what I sold. I didn't answer. Sometimes silence is kinder than words. She sank into the chair opposite me, head bowed. I don't deserve it back. I looked at her, really looked, not at the mistake, but at the little girl inside her who used to play with the same ring, pretending to marry her father. That child was still there, just lost for a while. It's not about deserving, I said quietly. It's about remembering. She nodded, a tear sliding down without drama. Then another. I reached over, covered her hand with mine, felt her pulse jump under my palm. The clock ticked softly, steady as forgiveness trying to learn its first breath. We sat there like that, mother and daughter, the ring between us like a shared heartbeat rediscovered. She read the note again, slower this time, and when she looked up, her voice was a whisper of truth. I'm sorry, Mom. I smiled, though it trembled. I know. She read the note twice before she cried. The next morning began quietly, too quietly. The kind of quiet that doesn't come from peace, but from something raw that's still trying to find its shape. The box was gone from the table. Only a faint square mark remained where it had rested all night, as if the wood remembered its weight. I found her sitting on her bed, sunlight cutting through the blinds in thin, pale lines. She was still in her pajamas, hair tangled, eyes swollen but clear in a way I hadn't seen in years. The ring lay in her lap, face up, catching every shard of light. She didn't hear me at first, or maybe she did and wanted a moment longer with the truth. Her thumb kept tracing the engraving again and again, like she was trying to memorize not just the words, but the meaning beneath them. When she finally spoke, her voice broke halfway through the sentence. It still fits. I stood by the door. It always will, I said softly. That's the problem. Her laugh came out shaky, half sob, half disbelief. I thought I was doing something right. Paying rent, being responsible, not bothering you. I didn't think about what it meant. She wiped her face roughly, as if that could erase the last few weeks. I saw it as gold, not him, not you. I walked over and sat beside her. The mattress dipped, and for a moment, the space between us closed the way time closes, not all at once, but slowly enough for you to feel every inch of it. She turned toward me, searching for something. Maybe forgiveness, maybe proof that she hadn't ruined everything. Her eyes landed on mine like a question she was afraid to ask. I can't give it back and pretend nothing happened, she whispered. I'm not asking you to, I said. The room felt small, just the sound of the curtain swaying, the slow rhythm of our breathing, and somewhere outside, a bird insisting that the morning was still ordinary. It wasn't. I reached for the ring, but she pulled back slightly, her hand still trembling. "Read it again," I said, out loud. Her voice caught on the first word. "For every sunset you survived with me." By the time she finished, her eyes were glassy, her shoulders shaking. "It's not about him dying, Leela," I said, watching her eyes dart up. "It's about how he knew I'd have to keep surviving, even after, even without him." She let out a sound, not quite a sob, more like a truth escaping after being held too long. "I sold that," she said. "How could I sell that?" "You didn't sell it," I said quietly. "You just forgot to see it." She pressed the ring to her chest, clutching it so tightly it left a small mark above her heart. For a second, I thought she might never let go. But then she looked down at it and shook her head slowly. "You should wear it," she whispered. I smiled, tired but real. "No, I've worn it enough. Let it rest a while." I took the small jewelry drawer from my dresser, the same one that had held it for 2 decades, and opened it again. The space inside still had that faint, ring-shaped circle, pale against the wood. She followed me, quiet, eyes wide and wet. I placed the ring inside, right where it had always been, then closed the drawer. Not a final act, just a pause. That's what forgiveness really is. Not a gift, not a transaction. A pause that lets the heart breathe again. For a long while, neither of us spoke. She stood behind me, hands wrapped around her own arms, head lowered. Then, softly, she said, "I don't deserve how kind you're being." I turned, looked at her face, my child, my mirror, my ache. "Kindness isn't the same as forgetting," I said. "It's just remembering gently." She nodded, her chin quivering. "I'll make it right." I believed her, not because of the words, but because of the way her voice broke at the end. The kind of break that only comes from truth. Later that morning, we made breakfast together for the first time in weeks. She chopped fruit, careful and quiet. I buttered toast. The sunlight stretched across the counter, turning everything gold. The knives, the plates, even the air. Neither of us mentioned the ring, but it felt like it was still there, glowing from another room. When she poured my coffee, her hand brushed mine. It was small, but it said everything. I caught her glancing toward the drawer once. Not guilt this time, just reverence. She smiled a little. "It's weird," she said. "I feel like he's here." I nodded. "He is. Some things don't leave. They just wait for us to notice." We sat together, quiet, chewing slowly. The sound of the clock faded into the hum of the refrigerator, the same constant pulse that had carried us through everything. For the first time in a long while, the silence didn't feel like distance. It felt like peace, finding its place. Outside, the sky was the color of old apricot, soft and forgiving. The kind of morning that makes you think maybe things do find their way back. She stood and kissed my temple before leaving for work. "Love you, Mom," she said, almost a whisper. I didn't need to answer. She already knew. When the door closed, I looked at the drawer one more time. The sunlight hit it just right. A soft beam resting on the wood, as if to remind me that some circles, even broken ones, still hold light. She looked at the ring like it was breathing.